But all I'm saying is I really like Indiegogo better as a platform for the way that we like to wrangle the data at the end of the campaign. So it's really distressing that this is happening on Indiegogo because it's sort of a battered spouse syndrome. Do we keep on working with them even if they're going to hide us from people? And it's kind of like finding out your girlfriend's cheating on you. You know what I mean? It's like, what? Why would you do that? I mean, I've been so good to you.
Hello and welcome. This is CultureScape, the show that interviews the geek creators and influencers that built nerd culture. Today I have with me the wonderful Chris Braley. He is the man behind Bleeding Fool. He also helps manage and run a few Kickstarter comics campaigns. In particular, he is the one that's working with Mike Barron on his Indiegogo campaign for his latest project. Well, we wanted to bring on Chris because we recently interviewed Mike Barron, which will be kind of going in tandem with this interview. And we wanted to get inside understanding how the censorship happens on places like Indiegogo, what impact that has on comics, and learn a little bit about Chris in the meantime as well. Thank you, Chris, for coming on the show. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Peter. Appreciate you asking me.
All right, so let's tell the folks a little bit about yourself. You run Bleeding Fool. How did you get interested in running a website? What was your nerd background growing up? And then how does this all lead into what's going on with managing comics for people like Barron?
For me, it goes way back to when I was in grade school, and on the spinner rack, I was very fond of the old Harvey comics with Richie Rich and Sad Sack and all those. And one day, came across, I saw Spider-Man on, I think it was the Electric Company, and was familiar with Spider-Man from the cartoons, I think, and found an issue of Amazing Spider-Man that had Stegron and the Lizard Man, and it was a Christmas issue. So you got humanoid lizard Spider-Man in a Christmas issue. So I was hooked. I got old Conan comic books, which I know my mother probably would not have approved of if she had actually opened those comics back then, but I was hooked. I love the comic book medium, and amassed, a small collection. I've got a few white whales in my comic book collection, but I've always just sort of been fond of the medium because I'm an illustrator at heart. I was a doodler growing up, and at one time thought I wanted to be a comic book artist until I found out how much they made and decided I needed to try to do something else. I went into the Navy, did that for a little while, did college, got a couple of degrees. One was in art, and the other was in psychology. I don't really use either of them to any big degree, but about a decade or so ago, I started Brawley Image Group, which is my video production company. And comics and geek culture was always just sort of a fascination or a hobby with me. I love Terminator, I love Star Trek, I love Star Wars. I mean, I'm into all those things, not to any exuberant degree because I don't have enough confidence to dress up at comic conventions, even though I've been to a couple of them. And yeah, so I was a regular reader of CBR and Bleeding Cool. And I remember there was a discussion one time on Bleeding Cool. I can't remember the writer. It might have been Joe Glass, but I don't know for sure, where they were crowing about diversity and inclusion and how we needed more diversity in comics. And, that was the important thing. And you've seen this lately with sort of a woke push in comics where we just need to have everybody represented. And it's not that I have an issue with that, but I posted in the comments section that wasn't it amazing how X-Men 94, when it came out, was extremely inclusive and diverse, and they didn't market it that way at all. They just put it out. It happened to have an international cast of characters, and it was a hit. And it was one of the big hits, and eventually it overtook titles like The Avengers and Spider-Man and others. And I got shadow banned for making that comment. Now, I might have included a little bit of snark, but I tried to do any of my comments. A lot of them are sarcastic, but they're not filled with expletives or anything obscene. So I was surprised. And the reason I found out I was shadow banned was typically my comments would get responses or they would get thumbs up or thumbs down. This one
Mm-hmm.
got no responses. And I thought I was very proud of myself, that I had thought to make this really intelligent. I was really proud of myself with what I said. And no one was commenting. So I'd heard this term shadow banning. This had been about 5 years or so ago. And I thought, well, let me log out and just look. And I logged out, and sure enough, you couldn't see my comment anywhere. And that's when I realized they have hidden my comment from the other users because they didn't like that I pointed out sort of a massive hole in their narrative, if you will. And I got so incensed about it, Peter, that I thought I can start a website. I mean, making a website is not that hard to do. I'd been doing it for years. I knew HTML code, and you can always fire up a WordPress. And I thought, I'm just going to satirize Bleeding Cool. And they come at a lot of their stories from a very, shall you say, left wing side to things, but also from a very, although Rich Johnston does sometimes take people to task, most of the time he's praising or shilling for stuff. At least it appears that way. And we didn't want to do that. I wanted to just sort of do something that did it the opposite way, maybe from the right side of the aisle. And I didn't think much of it. It was just a little blog there for a while. And I got some other people that were interested in writing also from that perspective, like Doug Ernst and, several other guys,
Mm-hmm.
Captain Frugal, who does frugal comic collecting and reviews and things like that. And over the years, it's just sort of grown to where, I mean, we're still nowhere near as big as Bleeding Cool, and people can still go there. They do probably 20 times as many stories every day as we do. But it's sort of grown. It's fun. We've got our little niche over on this side of the internet. And Mike Barron actually was a regular reader. That's how I met Mike. He was a regular reader of the blog. And one day just sent me an email with cover art for Florida Man. And I just started noticing some of the success that creators were having crowdfunding. And I said, is this comic coming out? It was a great cover. And he said, no. He goes, I can't get my publisher to pick it up. He was doing a lot of work with Dark Horse. He still does a lot of work with Dark Horse now.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, you ought to crowdfund it. And he said, I don't know anything about crowdfunding. Would you help me? And, the rest is history. We did it, and we did quite well with it. And earlier this year, we split the graphic novel into 3 issues and published with American Mythology Productions, who do old Laurel and Hardy. They do Fright Night. I mean, they do Zorro. So it seemed to me that Florida Man is a mythological type of person, if you will, and it was a good fit for American Mythology. And so we've done a few other campaigns ever since, Mike and I have.
Yeah, Thin Blue Line last year, that was very successful. That one did very well. It made, besides doing really strong on its Indiegogo, it made the media rounds. I think it was on Fox and Friends, all over the place. Places
Yeah, it did
comics
really
typically
well.
don't go.
Indiegogo was probably around $95,000, and Kickstarter we did around $45,000. It was a tremendous hit, and obviously getting it on Fox and Friends, it was just fortuitous that it was an active campaign, and it was Police Week, and Fox was looking for stories, and we had put out a press release or something, and they just reached out, and it just worked out. It was really fortuitous for us.
Yeah, it is nice when it happens. So shadow banning, for those who are perhaps not familiar, it's the idea that if you were on a platform of some kind, okay, maybe it's commerce, maybe it's social media, whatever, it's in people's minds, there are either 2 ways to go. Either you are allowed on the platform or you are blocked. So either you're let in or you're let out. But what has happened over the last decade is that these platforms have realized that they can make it so no one sees a person. So you can post as much as you want to the wind and you can engage, but no one's going to see it. You're basically kept in a silo. where no one else can hear you. So yell as loud as you want. And in this way, they don't get the problems for people complaining about bans, and they still get to keep users. And many of those users will still keep trying to yell into the silent and hope someone hears them anyways. And it doesn't just apply to social media. That's probably where people are most familiar. Facebook, I have a aunt. She went to school for forestry. There was some story in the news that had to do with forestry, and she had a different opinion. And all of a sudden she's like, where did everyone go? No one's replying to anything anymore. And look, to those who say some of this is in people's heads, I agree. To some extent, I'm sure it is. But I think there's enough evidence to say that this is a tactic that goes on. And what's interesting here is when you move away from social media and you move to where money is involved, that is where you can find real evidence that is taking place. So Indiegogo, which used to be, and if you probably remember this, Chris, is that unlike Kickstarter or the other GoFundMe, another one, that Indiegogo until 2018 used to be the free speech one. Like if you can't get over there, you can go to there. Were you involved back in those days? And what did you see happen to Indiegogo since?
Well, I really didn't start poking around Indiegogo until 2020, 2019, probably. But it had a reputation for being a more free-spirited platform. Kickstarter was, although Kickstarter is still a much bigger platform, I think they almost had more of a curator sort of presence where you really had to be a specific type of project for them to let you on. They actually do a 3-day review process on Kickstarter. You never really know where you stand until they approve the campaign. And Indiegogo, I think you're right, was much more of, had a reputation at least for being more of a free speech, free-spirited, second Johnny-come-lately to Kickstarter. They're the second biggest one out there.
Yeah, and for people who are interested in comics, especially comics gate projects, but maybe just a comic that's somehow out of the mainstream. I mean, there are people like Chuck Dixon, who sometimes you might say he's comicscape, but much of the time he's still mainstream. And Indiegogo is sometimes the best place to look for interest in the project because that's where comic watchers are looking for new projects. So,
sure. Well, even Keanu Reeves did Berserker. I think that's on Boom Studios. They did their launch on Indiegogo. And Wesley Snipes just did a comic book and they did an Indiegogo campaign. So like Dynamite Entertainment, some of the bigger small press studios have done campaigns there. I do think you're right, Peter, that Indiegogo has a bit of more of a reputation for being very friendly to comics and graphic novel projects, more so probably than Kickstarter does.
Okay, so it is surprising to many that we are now seeing that Indiegogo has become very censorious and that they are implementing things that are effectively shadow bans. Can we get into what it's like in your end? For example, when did you notice perhaps the numbers or the traffic started to change? When did you realize something was up? And then what happened when you tried to confront or reach out to Indiegogo for an explanation?
So we launched the campaign in late September, and it just shot off like a bang. Really, I think we did like $11,000 the first day, and your first day is usually your biggest.
And what's the name of the comic again for everyone?
Yeah. This is the Private American. Sort of a wordplay on like Captain America. This is the Private American, and it deals with maybe a touchy political subject, which is sort of where we thought the shadow ban stemmed from. It's basically a Punisher type character. He's a former Green Beret, and he lives in South Texas. And he is familiar with what's going on at the border and that there's a lot of drug trafficking and human trafficking and cartels and gangs that are coming across. And Border Patrol is just sort of overwhelmed. And then one day, the open border basically sort of touches his family in a very violent, tragic way. And he says, I'm going to do what I know best. I'm going to take what I know about war to the border and stop all this fentanyl and stop these cartels. So it's
Mm.
basically a one-man army and a partner, and it's called the Private American.
Okay, so what happened there with going back to Indiegogo? What happened there? Because at first things did seem like they were working. When did you
Yeah,
notice the switch? What was going on?
well, when we hit, so around $20,000, we had raised around $20,000, and when you do these campaigns, you do things, or some people do what's called a stretch goal. So, like you hit $5,000, we're going to do a heavier stock paper. You do 10,000, everybody's going to get a sticker, custom sticker for the book. At $20,000, we had a stretch goal from an artist named Dan Lawless. He's great, and that was going to be a new variant cover. You know, we've got the regular cover from Richard Bonk, and we've got a special variant cover from Steve Rude. But Dan's was at $20,000. So Dan starts promoting the campaign once his cover's on there, right? And he emails me on Friday night, late Friday night, the day after we've reached that goal, and says, "Hey man, people can't find the campaign." I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, they're typing Private American, Private America, the Private American, Mike Barron's Private American, and could not find it." Now, at the time, I thought, well, that's weird, but I didn't think much of it until I decided to sort of investigate it myself. And sure enough, and I think I sent you the video of just the search
Yes.
for Private American. And there was every way possible that you tried, and as far down as you would scroll, you could not find it. And so I sent an email, I guess that was October 29th, to Indiegogo. They responded, "Thank you for the note. I've looked into it. That's going to require further assistance from our trust and safety team. I've escalated it, and we'll get back to you." I didn't hear anything for about 3 days, and I wrote again to a different email that I have, a basic, just a flat support email, and they said, "Thank you. We've received your message, and we'll return it as soon as possible." A few days later, it was, "I'm currently looking into it. I'll be in touch when I have further information." That was November 2nd, and we have not heard anything since. I actually sent them another email 3 or 4 days later, November 6th, that said basically it was just highly irregular. What's going on? This is affecting and impacting our active campaign. And it kind of impacts it a couple of ways. You get a lot of backers. It's hard to explain this unless you're in the crowdfunding world, but there are actually people called super backers, right? So they troll through Kickstarter and Indiegogo looking for things to back. That's not my mindset, but it's a true story. About 33% of your income will come in from people who find you on the platform. And the way that they find you is either just a straight search, or you are suggested at the bottom of multiple pages on the site. So let's say I'm going to go look at, let's take the new Chuck Dixon book, First Kill, right? So I go to First Kill and I go, well, maybe I'll come back later, but I scroll all the way to the bottom and there will be 4 or 5 suggested similar projects. Well, the Private American should show up there, but now it doesn't. And then when if I decide to back the Chuck Dixon book, I'll go in through I'll process the order and everything, and then I'll land on a page that says, here's some other projects you might be interested in, and they're not there either. And then I found out, and I don't know if I sent you this video demonstration, even if you favorite, like I want to follow this project, let's say you don't have the money right now, you hear about it, and then you go there, and you're like, oh man, I want that book right there, but I need to wait until payday. So there's this little heart function, you follow it, and then you can go back and look at all the campaigns you're following and go back. Plus, you get updates from the campaign you're following. In other words, all the people who back a campaign get updates, because we'll send out a new update about once a week or every 2 weeks, just something going on. We just launched a art contest, so we sent out an update the other day. Well, everyone that follows the campaign also gets those updates. So you're sort of reminded, hey, I still need to back this, and you'll even get a reminder as the campaign is winding down. And now it appears that Indiegogo is also hiding us from those people who have actually opted in to learn more, which to me is insidious. And I really wish that we could find out what's going on, at least whether or not there's anything we can do. If it were violent imagery or some terminology that we were using, we would be happy to acquiesce because we really like the platform. So we would modify the campaign to whatever Indiegogo requires. But they're not doing that. They're not responding. To me, that's the biggest concern, is that they're not responding at all at this point. And there's no reason for that. I know I did contact the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund about this, and we have been engaged in a discussion with them. And the term, you mentioned it earlier, ComicsGate came up because Mike is very friendly with a lot of the guys that are sort of the big talkers, the big faces, the big time creators in ComicsGate. And you've got everybody from Bill Willingham to Chuck Dixon to Ethan Van Sciver to John Malin, Dale Keown, Billy Tucci. I mean, there's all kinds of names that people are going to recognize from the 90s and early 2000s era of comic books, and even some from the Bronze Age. And of course, Mike Baron, he's known for writing The Punisher for 5 years, or even The Flash over at DC Comics or Nexus for many years. So there's sort of this loose connection of creators who are from the right side of politics, and sort of which prevents them from getting more work. Now, maybe they are a-holes. I don't know. They're not to me. But regardless of affiliations or philosophies, I'm not sure how that justifies shadow banning the project. And it turns out that we're not the only project that's dealing with this, but of the projects that I'm familiar with, they all do seem to have some tertiary connection to ComicsGate.
Yeah, the other names looking into this, reaching out to some people, other names I know we're seeing it. There are ComicsGate, EVS, so Ethan Van Sciver, who has a very successful record with self-funded comics. Like he's one of the best. He's very talented.
Millions of dollars raised.
He's really he's really good. He knows how to press all the buttons, get people interested.
Oh yeah.
Richard Meyer, your boy Zach, or Diversity in Comics as he used to be on YouTube. He worked on all kinds of interesting projects. Jawbreakers is a pretty well-known comic that people may be familiar with. He also worked on Expendables. Not even just people in ComicsGate, though. There you were pointing to a few projects where they had easily crossed the 100,000-200,000 threshold mark. And then all of a sudden they disappear. And these are like the biggest comics on Indiegogo. If they were treated fairly, they were among the top 5 comics on Indiegogo, period. And you can't find them, which is extremely bizarre.
Well, and it's such an effective suppression tool also, because you can find them if you have the direct link. Right. So if somebody shares a link to you in an email or in a tweet or a DM or whatever, you can click that and go straight to the campaign page. The problem is when, you mentioned Mike Baron being on Fox and Friends. Well, Mike can say, oh, yeah, you go to Indiegogo, just search The Private American, and then you have millions of viewers that will go to Indiegogo and they can't find it. Right. So and like in a printed magazine or newspaper, I know most media is not print anymore, but some people just don't have that link and they just want to go and search for it and find it themselves. And that's really the way that I find most of these. I'll just go there and type Ethan's name or the name of Rainbow Brute or whatever the latest campaign is that he's got up there, and that's how I find it. And now you can't find those. It's almost it's surreal when you realize that that's what's happening, and they're not. It's a ghosting. They've turned you into ghosts.
Okay, so let me push past you a few theories I've heard from people asking what they think this might be. One theory is that they are not shadow banning immediately, that they're going to let people get through like maybe the first 2 or 3 whatever they call them at Indiegogo, Kickstarter goals, and then the shadow banning comes in. Because I noticed that a lot of these projects, at least that we know about, that's gone shadow banned, they did at least many of them did reach their initial funding goal.
Yes.
So Do you think that's what's happening? Or are they shadow banning from the start? What do you think? What do you think is kicking in that causes to go from project that is not shadow banned to project that is shadow banned?
I'm not sure what is triggering the shadow ban. I don't even know for sure that it's Comicsgate related. That's my best guess. But maybe because those are the campaigns that are making noise about it, right? There could be campaigns that are being shadow banned and they don't know at all. Like I said, if Dan hadn't said, hey, people are searching and can't find it, look into this, I would have never looked into it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, is there some sort of trigger that's happening? I've heard the same thing like, well, if anybody changes their campaign, they're getting shadow banned. Well, every stretch goal, whenever you reach a stretch goal, you tend to go in and edit the campaign and say, hey, this is now unlocked, right? Or a nice scratch through or some indicator on the page. You have to update the page. So if it's automatic, then it's impacting every single campaign on Indiegogo. And that's ridiculous. I mean, to me, that's like, why would you want to slow the momentum of a campaign that's building momentum? Because they're still collecting 5%. And so 5% of $10,000 is a lot less than 5% of $100,000. So I'm not sure why they would cut their nose off to spite their face like that. But that might be sort of the trigger mechanism, but it still doesn't make sense, right? In other words, why they're doing it is what I want to know, not how they're doing it, because it's being done. I don't know if it's happening at the beginning or if it's happening after the first stretch goal is met or after the campaign has reached its funding goal, right?
Yeah.
But whatever they're doing, whether it's intentional or accidental or automatic, it's a suppression of successful campaigns, which why on earth would anyone want to go on a platform that's going to hide you from people looking for you?
Yeah, and that's the weird part is Indiegogo, they make I think it's 5%. They make 5% off of any project.
Yeah.
And so they have every incentive to have these projects succeed. They need the comics projects and every other project to be as big as they possibly can because Indiegogo then gets a bigger a piece of the pie. And this is one theory I heard from another person who had a bit more information, knows some people. That one theory that they've heard is that perhaps Indiegogo's financials are not as strong as many are being led to believe, and that they are just trying to get in someone's good graces or somehow push down the negative so that Indiegogo is an easier sell to a different company and they can take on the risk and the people at Indiegogo who run it now can, enjoy a nice payday. Do you think there's any truth to that? I don't know if I have seen anything that establishes it, but it is an interesting theory.
Well, I mean, all we can do is speculate, right? I don't know what their thinking is. I'm not even sure if it's some sort of weird pursuit of making them appear more viable. To me, if Ethan Van Sciver raises $2 million on your site and you earn $100,000 of that with your 5% cut, that seems to me to be the more viable option. We mentioned Kickstarter earlier being a little more left wing, I guess, than what Indiegogo's reputation is. And we currently have a private American campaign over there, and we hit our funding goal in the first hour, and we're not shadow banned on Kickstarter. So I'm not sure if that is the reasoning for Indiegogo, that they're struggling to financially, so they're suppressing these big campaigns because they're Comicsgate or something. I mean, I'm not sure. I know that Comicsgate has gotten a really bad rap. You could also argue that Donald Trump has gotten a really bad rap. And why do some of the platforms not want Donald Trump on their platform, right? Even though he probably brings a lot of engagement and activity to those platforms. I mean, are we sort of a microscopic version of where Donald Trump was? I don't know. But it's all insane to me. At least Donald Trump knew he was being thrown off platforms. We're just being shadow banned. And like I said, I think the insidious part of this is rather than saying, we don't approve of your campaign or we don't approve of your thoughts about the comic book industry, or we don't approve of your politics, so you can't raise money on our platform. It's like we're not going to admit that we're shadow banning you because that's really bad press. We're just going to do it. We're going to show these people that we're trying to impress that we're doing it. And woke points. I mean, what is the point of it? It boggles the mind.
It is frustrating. I think the major difference, I mean, there are lots of differences, obviously, between a major figure like Donald Trump.
Sure.
Of course, a person like that, they're big enough that even though if they don't have access to the mainstream platforms, they can figure things out off it. I think even for someone, and Mike Barron isn't, in the world of comics, he's big, but I think to people who are outside comics, his name means absolutely nothing.
Oh, sure.
If we're being honest,
absolutely.
Even someone like anyone in comics these days, pretty much.
Anyone we've mentioned. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Except maybe Sylvester Stallone, right? But you know, Donald Trump can go start Truth Social. He has the means, the resources, the money, the influence, and can go just create his own social media platform. On the other hand, we cannot do any such thing. This is sort of one of our big outlets to do that. And I've heard people say, well, you can just go straight to publishing. And we have published with, the regular major publishers before. But the thing about crowdfunding allows you to pay for the colorist, the letterist, the printing. You can do extra things and build a lot of engagement. And there's an upfront cost to publishing these books on your own. And being able to publish on your own, you're free. You can publish what you want. Last year when we did Thin Blue Line, which you mentioned earlier, we did shop that around to some of Mike's old publishers and some others that we thought it might work with, like Humanoids and some others. And there were a few responses we got back that said, F this propaganda, remove me from your email list. It was just insane. And it was really the first time that I knew there was so much anti-cop sentimentality out there, mentality from some of the people in the arts. And I get it. I mean, most creatives and people in the creative arts industry are very liberal, very left wing. But you would think that free speech and being anti-censorship would fit in that model, or at least it did with all the old liberals that I grew up with, but not anymore. So it's really a weird situation, a weird cultural world that we find ourselves in, where free speech is no longer allowed, and certain topics are just verboten, or subjects, or people. So it looks like Comicsgate's just sort of been othered on Indiegogo, and I really hate that because it is, there's a company called BackerKit, which is starting their own thing next year, and for the longest time, they were doing post-campaign fulfillment. They would combine all your information from Kickstarter and Indiegogo. Those were the big ones. There are much smaller outlets like IndieCron that sort of compile the same information, but BackerKit goes beyond that and doing post-campaign surveys, you name it. And one of the guys reached out to me after our last big campaign and said, hey, we're here to help you with the next campaign if you want. And so we started going back and forth, and he was recommending Kickstarter over Indiegogo because Indiegogo had some financial issues. At least that's what he implied without coming straight out and saying it. And I argued on Indiegogo's behalf, saying, well, I like Indiegogo better because the data they provide is much more granular. It's much easier to sort. And this is a huge difference between Kickstarter and Indiegogo. Indiegogo, when the campaign ends or goes into in demand, you have access to everyone's name, email, mailing address, and what they backed. At Kickstarter, you don't have that. You have their name, and you can contact them directly through the platform, but you do not get their shipping address until they fill out what Kickstarter lovingly calls a survey. Well, if you're like me, it's the 21st century, and I'm used to email, and I don't like to answer surveys, right? Because to me, that's spam. I wish they would call it fill out your shipping information or something, because that's really all it is. It lets them put in their current shipping address, and then Kickstarter will release those to you one at a time. It's really a painful process. And unfortunately, the way that process works, you can send out messages to all of them. You can send out bulk messages by tier, on and on and on. And still, we had almost 3,000 backers on the Thin Blue Line over on Kickstarter. And there's still about 50 or 60 that have never filled out the questionnaire, the survey, for whatever reason. Maybe they've marked their emails, Kickstarter emails, as spam. I don't know. But all I'm saying is I really like Indiegogo better as a platform for the way that we like to wrangle the data at the end of the campaign. So it's really distressing that this is happening on Indiegogo, because it's sort of a battered spouse syndrome. Do we keep on working with them even if they're going to hide us from people? It's almost like being a prostitute, where, yeah, the sex is great, but we don't want anybody to know we're hanging out with you. You know what I mean? I hate to be so crass about it, but that's sort of how it feels.
Yeah, not a metaphor, I think, that I completely understand, but I get what you're saying. The issue is, for people who don't, why these things matter is it's not just the people who are being affected that have successful campaigns, like the one you were doing with Private American or Thin Blue Line, but it's also about all the people who are starting, who are never going to be seen at all. People who are just entering, they don't know who to connect with, they don't know how to raise funds properly. They just, maybe they have a great comic, but if Indiegogo is going to stop them from growing, we're never going to see that. It's not just the people who are being censored now; it's all the people that might be censored that we don't know about now and in the future.
Absolutely.
And it's just not right for any company really to play these kind of games. Like, come on, if you sign with agreements, there's a trust between the user and the product, whatever the platform is. If I'm on Twitter and they say, yeah, we want to have you here, tweet. They don't do verified anymore, but they gave me a verified check, and they're like, that seems like they want me here, but then they're going to make it so people can't see my stuff, and it just doesn't sit right with me. And it doesn't sit right anyone. Some people who don't experience it, they think, oh, it's not a big deal. But when you do, it really does give you a sense like this is kind of an unfair practice. It just doesn't work. It just doesn't work.
Well, you're right. It's not right. It's deceptive. And it really can harm creators who are just starting out or maybe don't know how to game the system. The only way we were able to get around the shadow ban is to just start promoting our URL. We bought a URL, theprivateamerican.com. And if you go there, for a while, we were just redirecting. We had just redirected. You type in theprivateamerican.com and it would go to the Indiegogo page. But once I realized they were hiding us, even though that would still work, that redirection, I said, no, we've got to put up a page at theprivateamerican.com and have a link to Indiegogo, a link to Kickstarter. And we also were trying out a new crowdfunding platform called Crowdfunder with no E. So it's crowdfunder.com. So we've got links to all three of those platforms. And, anyone who's not savvy enough to get their own URL, I mean, they're really going to be out of luck because otherwise you have to say, go to indiegogo.com/projects/the-private-american/78643. It's ridiculous. Of course, you can share whatever the URL is on social media and so on, but just knowing theprivateamerican.com, you can go to it, you can find it, it's great. But some people aren't going to be savvy enough, and it's really going to hurt smaller creators that can't overcome that shadow ban, particularly if you don't know what triggers it.
Yeah, exactly. Such a shady thing. I guess that kind of one of the names.
It's shady. It's wrong. I mean, you nailed it. It's just wrong. It's not right. It's wrong, and it's deceptive, and it's shady, and it's kind of icky because, like I said, I really like Indiegogo, and it's kind of like finding out your girlfriend's cheating on you. You know what I mean? It's like, what? Why would you do that? I mean, I've been so good to you, right? I'm giving you this money. You're taking 5% right off the top. So. And I wish that we had as much traction at Kickstarter. But like I said, when we did Thin Blue Line, we did like $95,000 on Indiegogo. We did about half that on Kickstarter. Who knows why?
All right. Well, Chris Braley, thank you so much for coming on. I've of course done work with you on Bleeding Fool. Always enjoyed that. You're a wonderful personality and a decent editor. I hope the things with the Shadow Ban and Mike Barron's projects, I hope that gets fixed. I hope everything becomes, it's not like I'm rooting for these platforms to go down. I know people with the Twitter, a
Right.
lot of people are like, burn, let it burn. And they're really rooting for the anarchy and chaos. And I don't do that. It's like, I like these places. I have issues with them. I want the issues fixed. It's not like I just want them gone entirely.
I think you've just personified the conservative perspective, right? I mean, we would like to
Mhm.
conserve these institutions that are serving people. There may be some tweaks that need to take place, but they were functioning fine. And up until this campaign, Indiegogo was not broken. Now it seems like it's broken, and that's the struggle. It's a shame. It's wrong. If I get a little more, if we make a little headway with the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, who typically are very anti-censorship and typically assist, or they're known for mostly assisting more left-wing creators. It's comic book related, but they're taking this matter very seriously. So if I have anything to update on that front, I'll let you know, Peter.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Chris, for coming on. Please check out bleedingfool.com,
Yes, sure.
wonderful geek news website. And be sure to check out Mike Barron's work with Private American and his previous comics they've done, like you said, Florida Man, Thin Blue Line, which was fun. I'll end it here. People who said that Mike Barron, that was propaganda, obviously had never read Mike Barron's work. Because
No.
if you know his run on Punisher, that was like that was as far as you could get with like anti-cop.
It really was. Mike,
Yeah,
I know you spoke with
crazy.
him, but he had an incident with the police when with his ex, or not his ex-wife, his wife who's passed away sadly, and he dealt with the police, and they were so respectful and so treated everything very gingerly and respectful that he just earned an all new respect for police. And of course, the artist on Thin Blue Line is an active duty police
Yeah.
officer. And so the book was very even handed. I think a lot of people were surprised that it did sort of tackle it from all angles. And Mike's a great writer. I mean, he didn't win an
Yeah.
Eisner Award just for being, who he is. He's really good. And if anyone's interested, you can go to Thin Blue Line Comics to check that out, or you can go to Florida Man Comics to check out his Florida Man work. Mike's is more prolific these days than ever before, and I'm honored to work with him. And honored anytime you write for us, Peter. Your stuff's always top shelf. You're a
Oh,
great
thank you.
writer.
Thank
I
you.
know you're prolific. You're all over the place, though. I mean, you're in high demand, it's always good to be in demand, not on demand. And you are in demand. So I appreciate your time today, Peter.
Yeah, no problem. Well, thank you everyone for taking a listen. This has been CultureScape. And until next time, my friends, keep geeking out.